I bet you're wondering, how did it come to this? After all, around 2 years ago, Pat did a segment discussing a video of mine. Things seemed to be going smashing. The Amico was on the way out, and celebration would soon be in order. However, none of that mattered because something stood out above all the rest. Pat accused Brett Weiss, an incredibly small businessman, writer, and paid contributor to Ultimate Nintendo Guide to the NES Library, of fraud, and removed all 59 of his reviews from the book, citing this as the reason, in addition to his writing being unacceptable for publication.
This book has reviews in them. These aren't descriptions. The only book where it's a full library of reviews. We weren't sure he played through all the games he actually quote-unquote reviewed. And I didn't have the choice. I was in a pickle at the time to get extra writing in the book. So for the third revision, since the second print run had to come out right after the first because it was sold out, by the third print run, though, I was like, I don't trust these reviews. We're rewriting all of them.
So what's the real story here? Did Pat knowingly push out a book full of unacceptable writings to meet an unrealistic deadline and make every sale possible for a book which was going to be in high demand and was going to benefit from releasing inside the same launch window as the NES Mini?
His writing came out, part of it, before the first print. The second print, Brett, again, I'll repeat this, I had to go back into print because it sold out nearly immediately on Amazon.
Or is this a personal and calculated attack based on lies, pettiness, and the desire to destroy reputations? The thing is, the book is more the end of the story, and we need to start at the beginning. This is Retro Impressions. Pat Contri, NES Punk, from Shill to Salesman. In 1987, video rental stores were a hot commodity. Greg Pabbage had been involved in the media rental business since 1982 and decided to branch off into something new. Preview Video Sales Inc. was formed to deal in the reselling of used VHS cassettes. As the business grew, the concept expanded to purchasing bulk, used video games, and unmovable inventory, which he would redistribute it to stores such as Walmart and Blockbuster to be resold at a deep discount. It wasn't just Greg running the business, Randy Keller owned 25% as well. During this time, they had a meeting with Active Enterprises, the developer of a game called Action 52, where they discussed the potential of assisting with any unmovable stock and other distribution. Greg felt the terms laid out by Active Enterprises were outlandish, but before parting ways, he obtained a prototype cart for Action 52 for the NES.
He did not have pallets of finished games in evidence, only a handful of what he called prototypes, of which I returned with one, which he was very reluctant to part with.
The unlicensed game would eventually release with less than 10,000 copies total in circulation. In 2001, Greg Pabbage was sued by his old business partner, Randy Keller, for tortious interference with a business relationship, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. The business relationship had fallen apart years earlier after Pabbage discovered Keller was embezzling company money, and this lawsuit centered around that breakup. A jury of 12 individuals decided the evidence was clear. Pabbage had committed fraud, with a judgment for Keller at over $3.5 million. Pabbage would appeal this, and while the ruling of fraud was not overturned, the monetary damages due Keller was reduced to zero. This brings us back to Action 52. It was a collection of 52 games considered epic for all the wrong reasons, really only discussed in the smallest of hardcore collector circles. In smaller circles, more interested in preservation and history, it's notable for being a bootleg of a bootleg, using a mix of stolen music, art, and code from other sources while layering in new but unpolished original content. That was until AVGN did a video covering it in 2010, and this alone made it known to the general public as a game so bad you needed to experience it to believe it. With AVGN putting an enormous spotlight on Cheetaman, Greg Pabbage saw an opportunity to make a quick buck and started looking into auctioning off his prototype cart. But after some discussion with the owner of VideoGameMuseum.com, it was discovered what Greg had was the earliest Action 52 prototype known, and it was special. Instead of Cheetaman in the 50-second slot, there was an alpha build for a game called Action Gamer, and because Greg had the only known copy in existence, discussions started on how he could monetize his gifted possession beyond a single sale.
The more I became involved in it, the more I learned about the fact that this could be duplicated.
A game, even a prototype, connected to a series that was now a hot commodity could be worth a ton more if you could bootleg it. And when he discovered that was possible, he did just that. In 2011, Action Gamer was stripped from the Action 52 cart and sold as a new release called Cheetaman 2: The Creation. It was an abandoned game concept with a couple minutes of gameplay included and nothing else. He sold 500 deluxe packs for $500 each and 1,000 single game packs for $200 each, netting $450,000 total. That is, if every copy was sold. And they apparently didn't, or he made more, as it's still being offered on his website for the now reduced price of $314 and $99 respectively. A year later, Greg was back at it. This time he was going to issue a bootleg of the already dumped Cheetaman 2, an unreleased game that was in an early build state and couldn't be finished due to a litany of bugs. To help market this game to hardcore collectors, he hired Pat Contri, James Rolfe, and the Game Chasers to shoot a promo video and be official spokesman for the Kickstarter campaign. The campaign promised to bring on board the original team members from when the game was in production, make it so the game could be completed, and release a version that may not be good, but would eliminate the bugs, especially the game-breaking ones. The game would cost $60, and people had massive issues with it when the campaign launched. The main issues people had were as follows. They saw Greg as a scammer, looking for a quick buck due to his prior scam release. On that note, people felt offended by the $60 price for a bootleg release of a game that had already been dumped eons ago. James would even chime in on this, defending the $60 price by stating,
"Honestly, I've paid $60 for the Nintendo World Champion reproduction cart that you saw in the NW episode, and that game didn't come with a box or comic book."
5 years later, Super Russian Roulette, a new and original game of the highest quality for the NES, launched its Kickstarter. The price? $55. I asked my good friend Voultar about the cost to produce 1,000 NES carts in 2012, and he said,
"Now we're going to complete our repair on this port by just introducing fresh solder into these joints, very, very slowly and gently, allowing it to wick in, and just like that, we're preparing this thing for fun times." Now wait a minute, look, $25 for a cartridge? Think whatever you want to about the group funding effort of Cheetaman 2, but look at that price breakdown analysis. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. In 2012 prices, if you were paying $25 to produce a single cartridge, your overhead was outrageous and you weren't going to make any money. Nonetheless, in 2012, a cartridge like that, including the engineering fees to design the PCB, including the parts, including the production, including the assembly, I can't see the cartridge costing any more than $10 on the absolute high end. Maybe more closer to 9, maybe even more closer to 8, depending on the fabrication house you went with. Nonetheless, if there's any evidence to suggest that the Cheetaman 2 group fund was suspect, that price breakdown doesn't make a lot of sense to me. As somebody who produces printed circuit boards and as somebody who designs electronics, I can tell you, don't know about that one.
Over a year before the Kickstarter was announced, a well-known ROM hacker named Paco-chan released and continued to update a patch that completely fixed the game. In the patch notes, he states,
"The final boss disappears too, and it's impossible to finish the game. Now, all that is fixed and the game can be completed with no problems."
Was this legal? We'll come back to that. With that in mind, the attention turned to Pat Contri, the Game Chasers, and James Rolfe. Their communities wanted to know why they were selling out their fan base, shilling for what appeared to be a scam, and if they valued money over integrity. As the Kickstarter video was uploaded to and promoted on the Game Chasers and AVGN's YouTube channels, in addition to the campaign receiving promotion on Pat's thepunkeffect.com website, the blowback was inescapable. Mike Matei, the co-producer, writer, and director for Angry Video Game Nerd, who was not okay with the negative comments or the channel's involvement, posted this statement.
"I personally do not believe in this project. I don't understand why anybody would need $65K to make a hack game. Besides that, there's already a fixed version of the game floating around. What kills me is the whole point of AVGN, Action 52/Cheetaman, was to make fun of how this game was a ripoff. And here we are, ignorantly supporting what we're against."
And with that, Pat Contri and company went into full damage control. Their promo videos were pulled down off of the Game Chasers and AVGN channels, followed by James posting a statement on his blog.
In addition, I'd like to explain. On Cinemassacre, we usually run advertisements for things like Burger King or something like that. So when I was asked to promote a game that I reviewed as AVGN, it sounded like a cool idea.
Pat even updated his promo post, scolding Mike Matei and everyone who was concerned about this project being a scam.
Mike's comment on YouTube about not supporting the Kickstarter was a knee-jerk panic reaction to the wave of negative criticism at the time. That was not James's opinion. Mike was not clued in on the production costs of the game, and unfortunately listened to the ignorant comments out there from people who had no idea what an NES reproduction cart was or the production costs involved in making said cart. I always figured the cost of the project was somewhere in the $40 to $45 range per cart, so I saw no problem with the project or the fact that Greg was making some profit for his time and effort. People have gotten on me for disabling comments on the Kickstarter video, as they have with Mike. But why should I have to read and accept comments that are filled with blind hatred, ignorance, and are spreading false lies about James, me, and the project?
Even though most of this has been scrubbed from the internet, some things still remain, including the Kickstarter promotional video featuring everyone mentioned. There's also Game Chasers episode 15, which contained what was essentially a 10-minute paid promotion teeing up the Kickstarter, which launched just 3 months later. Thanks to the hard work of Pat, James, and the Game Chasers, the campaign was a smashing success, netting $94,000, well exceeding its goal. As promised, the game started shipping and backers quickly discovered the ROM used was a slightly altered version of Pakuchan's Fix from 2011. You see, Pakuchan's Fix was still a work in progress, with its final release coming 4 years after the Kickstarter ended in 2016. From bug fixes to spelling and grammar, the corrections completed versus the ones still waiting in queue were identical. So, was it a scam? If we dismiss something very important we've yet to discuss, it certainly fits the billing for fraud and, without a doubt, can be classified as scummy business dealings where someone is financially taking advantage of people just like Pat by using Pat and other trusted community members to shill a product to individuals who have a similar need to collect it all. This group of friends chose to accept this job and help push their audiences into a scumbag opportunist pocket. They quickly swept it under the rug and used their position of authority within the community to shut down any discussion. To put it another way, Pat Contri and friends were okay shilling for a questionable product for monetary gain by exploiting their audiences by endorsing a $60 scam for a bootleg game. However, there's a bigger issue we've yet to discuss. Did Greg have legal rights to reproduce this game and market it? In 2012, people who asked this question would be banned, hidden, and blocked from forums, YouTube channels, and comment sections within certain websites. You see, Raul Gamla and Vince Perry created Cheetaman, and according to multiple sources, they never sold it or licensed those rights to anyone at any time. In fact, I confirmed with Eli, the owner of Pico Interactive, the person who many considered the top expert in retro game IP rights and holders about the Cheetaman IP. He informed me Cheetaman as an IP was indeed still owned by the widow of Vince Perry, his son, and Raul. Eli even shared that he had unsuccessfully tried acquiring the rights to the IP numerous times, but it was really hard to get all three owners on the same page, as it appeared that Raul didn't want to be found, as he informed Eli that he was the first person to ever reach out and try to acquire those IP rights. In fact, here's a post where Greg states he's unsure who the owners are.
If you put the ROM out there and then offered to sell reproductions to people who wanted it on a physical medium,
fine.
That's a gray area where I'm okay with it, but at least don't immediately profit off of someone else's shit.
It's time to talk about NES guidebooks, and what better place to start than with the first ever Nintendo guide containing full descriptions, colored screenshots, and box art of every NES game. A book that's often been emulated, a book by none other than...
Wait, you must be talking about me, Pat Contri, author, podcaster, video game historian, D-list celebrity, and cameo content creator.
No. That concept and book layout for the NES was first done by Jeff Wittenhagen, an NES collecting icon and critically important contributor to the community. If you were on Nintendo Age from 2009 on, you likely saw him going by the name the Subcon 3. Over the course of a decade, he would contribute over 4,400 posts, mostly discussing game collecting and special projects intended to help fill holes in the community's resource needs. One such project, known about on Nintendo Age in 2013 and discussed on his blog in May of 2014, was an NES book that may sound similar to one released in 2016.
I'm going to be making a second book, which is going to be a series of books focusing on collecting for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
The book was officially announced as ready for release on May 22, 2015. On June 26, Jeff Wittenhagen launched a Kickstarter campaign for the complete NES Collector's Book, which ended with 193 backers. Pat has never mentioned this book, even though he was an active member of Nintendo Age and discussed community-relevant Kickstarters on a regular basis during this period of the CU podcast. On November 21st, 2015, Pat's book was officially launched via Kickstarter with a public announcement made on the Nintendo Age forums. It netted $25,000 over 3 days, but pledges dropped by 50% on day 3. On the 24th, a promo video was published on Pat's YouTube channel, resulting in another $25,000 over 2 days. In the first 3 days of the campaign, he had 398 backers, and the first 3 days benefiting from his YouTube channel's promotion netted an additional 470. The campaign would end with 2,085 backers, an absolute juggernaut of a take. But not shocking, considering Pat's online presence in the original Nintendo collecting space, his self-proclaimed position as an NES expert, historian, and of course, his association with the angry video game nerd. Of the 2,085, I was one of those backers. Brett Weiss, one of the book's contributors, shared correspondence showing his 60 reviews were submitted by May of 2015, which he was hired to write a handful of months prior. The physical book was scheduled for delivery in March of 2016, with the digital version guaranteed by December of 2015, the same month the campaign ended. A clear indication that it was done, but funds were needed to print it. December passed and Pat missed the release date. An official delay was announced in January, citing factors outside of his control. The new date for shipment from the printer for the physical book was moved to April 2016, with the digital version set for early February. A few updates more, and we are in the second week of March when the digital version finally releases. Feedback is swift, and there are substantial errors being shared. It's clear that the book is a mess, and Pat is leaning heavily on his Kickstarter supporters to give editorial feedback. It's speculated this release is a draft copy due to the massive amount of mistakes being shared in public forums, with more issues likely being sent via DMs. Between the digital release and the announcement that the physical book was ready to print on May 27, 2016, the digital version was revised 3 times. But there are still some major issues that Pat wouldn't be addressing before going to print. Still, it seems Pat has welcomed the community's feedback and their service as free copy editors. The revisions are not clearly listed, and the ones which are contain generic references, items consisting of grammar, spelling, duplication, and formatting errors. There's also a fair amount of problems related to poor research and fact-checking. By August, the book started shipping via a third-party distribution service. I received mine on September 26, and it was in really sorry shape. I sent Pat a message via Kickstarter, receiving nothing but silence in return. Comments started rolling in, showing folks having similar issues, and they were not receiving replies. Someone posted an email for those that felt ghosted by Pat, so I emailed him a couple of times over the course of a few weeks, then finally gave up, realizing I was being ignored and wouldn't receive help. The campaign had a few detractors, wondering what purpose the book really served. Some people pointed out that the complete NES already existed, though not as gaudy or grandiose in its presentation. It had a nearly identical layout, with the ability to track your collection's progress, something usually reserved for text documents at the time. The other was regarding Questicle.net, and its owner Dylan having already reviewed every single NES game, a project started in 2010 and finished in 2014. Dylan's was a free resource, posted online in a very clean, clear, and easy to search format. There was one other thing. The book's main author, People on Nintendo Age had mixed feelings about Pat, as he was continuously running down just about everyone and anything, including that forum, its users, his family members, old friends, childhood schoolmates, and just about anyone else he deemed as unfit. The truth is, not a lot of people who know Pat like him.
It is a community. I see these people many times throughout the year, so we're friends first for sure.
Man, I guess you're lucky. I mean, like you said, not everyone works out, but in general, you found a nice, solid group. And I'm sitting here in San Diego. This isn't a woe is me. There's like no one out here. Ian has his job at the store, and he's heard a lot. And the other collectors in San Diego, most of them don't like me, so it's like it's a rough spot. But whatever. That's why I like talking to you guys. I'll live vicariously through someone like you that has a nice community.
Campaign aside, the book was mostly well received. I say mostly because I firmly believe people felt they were backing an NES fan passion project by a die-hard NES YouTuber. If other backers felt like I did, we were just happy to help someone achieve a goal beneficial to the community and didn't care to look at it via an overly critical lens. Others didn't feel the same. Here's a lengthy review from 2017 that encapsulates the feeling of just about every person within a more passionate segment of the community. Issues like tons of spelling and grammar errors, even after multiple revisions supported by backers who paid for the privilege to help fix bad work. Pat positioned himself as an NES authority and game historian, then straight up published things even general enthusiasts knew to be untrue, such as when he stated in his Tailspin review, which he wrote,
"It's a great licensing opportunity for a video game, so I'm going to chalk up Capcom's shortcomings here to the fact that they typically don't do shooters."
Many also felt Pat's contributions were the weakest in the book due to his heavy reliance on discussing negative childhood experiences, which clearly shaded his reviews and reflections. Now, I can understand taking a position on any of these points and find it absolutely unacceptable as an editor to let such an unpolished, unprofessional product ship out knowing it had so many problems. If you're not capable of the job, hire someone who is. It's also embarrassing to position yourself as an NES and third-generation gaming expert yet consistently get easy facts wrong. However, the criticism of Pat as a writer, his use of his friend Kevin in 11 of his reviews, or people taking issue with his writings being 1 star too high or too low, is mostly a matter of opinion and debate. Shadow5555 felt the review scores were not correct, but a ton of people feel that way about a ton of games, often leading to marginal swings within the average, with some outliers. Around the time the book released, I started to hear stories from multiple unconnected people who volunteered at the SoCal Retro Gaming Expo in California that Pat demanded exclusivity on the trade floor to sell his book if he was to attend the event in 2017. I've heard similar stories of larger YouTubers doing this in the sense of an exclusive timed period when asked to review games. For this video, I reached out to multiple sources to once again confirm the details of this story, and they did just that. Jeff Wittenhagen reached out for a spot and was told by Chris of SoCal Retro,
"Thank you very much for all the information you've provided. We will keep you in mind once we begin planning for our next expo in February."
This was not true. In fact, Jeff would reach out multiple times, having his communications ignored until the expo was sold, when he finally obtained a booth at the 2023 show. This seemed rather petty, as people close to the situation confirmed Pat had been in contact with Jeff, who shared tips and pointers he learned along his journey to help Pat self-publish his book. I say rumor because though I've confirmed the facts, the rest is a matter of opinion. The individuals involved are reluctant to go on record and have their receipts publicly shown. The thing is, I was there. I'm from Southern California. I know about the backroom dealings, the people involved, and the promises that were made and not kept. I've met and hung out with 8-Bit Eric's cupcake-making girlfriend at the time. It sounds stupid, but what I'm trying to say is while I'm not friends with these guys, our circle of friends and acquaintances would create a Venn diagram Vice President Kamala Harris would be proud to share. I know the scummy and unethical stuff done by these influencers to those working behind the scenes from 2017 to 2019 at this show. Those who have game shops, help with conventions, create related media, or do this as a hobby to zero fanfare. And you'll be hard-pressed to find a soul who has a positive opinion of Pat or some of his friends due to past interactions with them. I can also appreciate not wanting a vindictive and vengeful human with access to 250,000 subscribers, a person who has no ability to forgive those he feels have wronged him, from doing what he's always done: punch down, damage reputations, and do what's required to not admit fault. So why is any of this important? One word: hypocrisy.
When Brett used to ask me when we were producing the NES book, for example, where do you get your screenshots from? I said, well, a chunk came from Moby Games. So he would ask me these things, and I thought it was innocent, like, hey, I just want to know the process. Brett never told me at the time that he was planning to do a Super Nintendo book at the time. And not like Brett was obligated to legally, but the fact of the matter is Brett knew I was going to eventually do a Super Nintendo book, and Brett gleaned information off of me in order to do the future book, because his Super Nintendo book and NES book used Moby Games screenshots, for example.
That was from 2023, but if we go all the way back to 2015, when Pat's book was still active on Kickstarter, we can see hypocrisy alive and well. On the very Nintendo Age post that Pat created to promote his book, Jeff Wittenhagen chimed in defending Pat's use of non-original images via Moby Games, and informed someone asking for an SNES guidebook his would be released in late 2016 or early 2017. These were not secrets. These were stated facts discussed in public in a Nintendo-specific forum well before Pat's book was ever finished. Further, it wasn't exactly clear another book was on the horizon, and to be quite frank, if the first one didn't make so much money, I don't think anyone believed Pat would be interested in doing an SNES, N64, or even a Sega Genesis follow-up, being he wasn't really a console gamer outside of the NES and third generation of systems. He was, and remains to this day, a shelf collector and casual gamer at best.
Why do I need it, though? And you always say that about everything I buy, but this is my love, though. This is a console as a kid. I didn't have N64 as a kid. Super Nintendo, I had like 8 games and played the computer more. I'm never going to play them. I'm not going to play them. Yeah. I know that.
The success of the book, Pat had raked in $600,000 worth of physical book sales alone in under 2 years. I can't help but feel this influenced Pat to adopt a more mainstream position to better fit the salesman persona needed to market himself as he moved away from strictly being a paid shill. Remember his position regarding the production and sale of bootlegs back when he shilled for the Cheetaman 2 game? After the book became a hit, his position took a 180.
That would have been vaporware, yeah, potentially. And then you're out, thousands of people spending $400 or $350 with shipping, and just that sickens me to think that someone wants to do that to the quote unquote community and the hobby that we love. Mm. So if I'm going to be overzealous, so be it. If Ian's going to be overzealous about something like that, all for it. Calling out like this, calling out people selling reproduction carts, calling out scumbag sellers of the week, I don't f***ing care. I'm going to do it.
So you may not know about Brett, even though he had 59 reviews published in Pat's book, some of which were referenced on the CU podcast. Until 2023, Pat only mentioned Brett once by name in 2016 while promoting the NES book. The long and short of that segment was Pat, the book, and anyone associated with him is amazing. All other NES book offerings, such as Jeff's The Complete NES, are crap you need to avoid. So buy a certain guidebook and ignore all the others.
People were clamoring for a well-produced, well-researched, sturdy video game guidebook. There's a lot of stuff out there that either the materials, I wouldn't say, are 100% having held some of them and gone through them, and definitely the writing on some is not up to snuff. So I know I'm a decent writer at the very least. And I know I have the talent to see the good in other writers. I've hired good writers to help fill it out. Ian's a pretty good writer. And others that filled in the gaps here. Brett Weiss did great jobs.
Considering this, the picture of Brett is fuzzy, with the main reference being one Pat created. Let's fix that. Brett is an author and businessman who sells his writings. It's how he makes a living. Everything he does, including YouTube, is a promotion of that. Earlier in life, Brett wrote articles for various papers around Texas. He later moved into magazines and started publishing books, including his first video game related one, Classic Home Video Games 1972 to 84, a complete reference guide which was released in 2007, followed by several other video game related books. Before he wrote for Pat, their work appeared in the same magazine. From 2013 to 14, both Brett and Pat contributed written articles to Retro Video Game Magazine, alongside a slew of others. Brett comes off, and I don't say this to be rude but factual, from the community's perspective, he's not well liked. He is a living meme in what I call the retro underground community, with the "buy my book" tagline that is attached to him. He would likely sell a ton of merch if he just leaned into it. While many might not like Brett, Pat and Brett, along with a handful of others in this community, are nearly identical, though it could be argued that Brett is emulating the things that Pat does to a lesser effect. Both Brett and Pat are doing this as a full-time job, hustling to sell every book and nab every view possible. Nearly every video is a means of advertisement to further their reach and keep their boat above water. When speaking with Brett for this video, I asked if he would have taken the job had it not been a paid gig, and he said no, he wouldn't have accepted a non-paid gig. And that's Brett. He is who he seems to be on camera, a guy who's upfront about what he's selling while feeling there's plenty of water in the pond to have his own area. They're both there to make money, and if that money dried up, they'd both be gone to greener pastures. When you deal with Brett, you know up front you're talking to a car salesman, and that's not always the case, as I'll be discussing in another upcoming video on a certain scale model arcade company. He's like the person on the first floor of your local mall, trying to sell you on some sort of new phone plan or repair. You may strongly dislike that person, and even actively avoid them while talking smack, but there's no question about who they are. I think it's important to understand that dynamic because Pat is essentially the same guy. For nearly a decade and a half, Pat's been a used car salesman in the retro game space, continuously putting himself in profit above everything else. Pat's kind of like Richard Nixon, the Richard Nixon of YouTube. He could win by just doing what he does. He's a solid podcast host that has real potential to catapult beyond the numbers he's stagnated at. But like Nixon, he appears fixated on using underhanded tactics to monopolize the space, demonize his competition, and attack their reputations, even though they're a blip on the map when compared to him. Getting mad at someone for doing a book that's similar to yours, which is already comparable to hundreds of other review and guidebooks, because it's on a topic you want sole rights to, is called gatekeeping. Attacking someone who's an easy target due to being virtually unknown by painting a fraudulent narrative is quite despicable. If your book is better marketed, or suits a need, people will buy it. And with Pat's book, he hit one of those marks, so they did. The book delivered to backers was clearly unfinished and misrepresented during the Kickstarter campaign. The book shipped prior to being ready for prime time. The necessity of hitting a late deadline while sacrificing the quality of the product was fully understandable, as Nintendo was launching their NES Mini on November 11th that same year. A well-positioned, freshly published guide to the NES library by a self-proclaimed expert would benefit from that association.
His writing came out, part of it, before the first print. The second print, Brett, again, I'll repeat this, I had to go back into print because it sold out nearly immediately on Amazon Thanksgiving weekend.
I do not remember any drama between you two when you pulled the first ones out. They were just rewritten because they weren't very good.
Hi, it's Pat Contri, author, podcaster, video game historian, content creator.
Pat was the editor of his NES book and approved reviews from 2 different writers for publication that he later stated were essentially fraudulent material or poorly written. 59 from Brett, 8 from Stephen Wilds, 67 games total. That's more than the Virtual Boy and 32X libraries combined. Pat not vetting his writers, not having the knowledge to catch massive issues through 3 digital revisions before going to print, then only bringing up these accusations without evidence while trying to destroy reputations is a massive problem, in addition to being a moral and ethical shortfall. Ultimately, at least one of 2 things must be true when it comes to Brett being removed from this book. Either A, this is a petty attempt to take down a fellow author and ruin a reputation, or B, a book that was known to be of unacceptable quality was knowingly shipped to backers rather than correcting known issues to meet a self-imposed deadline, and unlike the Amico, nothing was going to stop Pat from getting it printed in time for the NES Mini's release window and convention sales. So which is it? Either way, Pat's treating his 250,000 subscribers and every soul who's backed his work as morons. Remember this? It's time to talk about convention goers getting access to the book well before Kickstarter backers. People weren't happy about it, and when calling him out, Pat would block them. This included longtime supporters of his channel. Chris Roberts is one such person. If you look over his Twitter feed, you can see he enjoyed the podcast, recommended content to the show, and backed both books. However, he was disappointed after learning Pat was selling the book at the Retro Game Con in 2019, well before the first backers books shipped. Opening the book, he noticed his name was also misspelled. As Chris has told me, the Kickstarter promised two things: a book by July, a deadline that was missed by 5 months, and their name printed inside. For Chris, both balls had been dropped. So he did what Pat so often does and vented about this in a public space. However, this quickly went sideways as Pat scolded him for discussing it in a public forum before blocking him.
In the future, I would recommend emailing if you have an issue versus starting a Twitter thread. You're likely to have a better experience.
By March of 2018, Pat has shipped out 10,000 physical books containing nearly 70 reviews which, according to him, were unfit for publication. And who could blame him? The demand was there thanks to Nintendo's impeccable timing, and these things could be fixed down the road, using his customers as unpaid copy editors in a for-profit business, while charging them for the privilege was a clever idea, and it's worked well for Pat up to this point. Ultimate Nintendo Guide to the NES Library has been out of print for some time. However, there's been a new book out in its place, and it never got a proper announcement. It should have been called Ultimate Nintendo Guide to the NES Library 2019 edition, but in order to erase the works of others, he's chosen to release it using the same name as the prior work, with a massive portion of the original being entirely replaced, as if it never existed. In 2018, it was announced that Blizzard was pulling a cash grab by releasing a mobile predatory pay-to-win game called Diablo Immortals. Now, I like Diablo just fine, the same as I like Trine just fine. However, some people really like Diablo, and we're talking enough to spend money to attend BlizzCon, an official gaming convention put on by the game's developers, which costs $200 per person to attend. It's where fan service announcements are expected and delivered with the anticipation of joyous applause from fans in attendance. Up to this point, Diablo was a PC release with recent home console ports, so with the phone game announcement, the air was sucked from the room. Following the presentation, there was a Q&A which went sideways when this question was asked.
I was curious, I see a lot of mechanics that we've kind of been begging for in Diablo 3 in this. Is there any plans to make this playable on PC, or is this strictly mobile forever?
Are there any? The current plan is to be on mobile, both Android and iOS.
Then came the iconic red shirt guy.
Hey, just was wondering, is this an out-of-season April Fool's joke?
I think every sane person passionate about something can understand this response. It seemed impossible that anyone would side against the consumer on this matter. Was there a soul brave enough to speak out, possibly in hopes of showing big corporations they were a safe bet to advertise with? A person of integrity who would always shill if the money was right?
Ian, do we like That's It fruit and veggie bars?
Yeah, we definitely do. Please, That's It. Come back to us. I hope we weren't the reason why our guy got fired, because, boy, we got a lot of fruit bars.
Yes! There was one such man, well, men, and this team would double down hard, landing on the anti-consumer side of big business in the most disgusting way.
I don't have to be pro this game to tell these people to shut the fuck up.
When the person in the audience said, is this a late April's Fool's joke?
Oh, sit your fucking ass down.
And people are applauding in the audience? You're all fucking babies.
Yeah.
All of you who applauded. You're all babies. You're rude, first of all.
Yeah.
But you're all fucking babies. And they're the reason you're there, because they gave you these franchises for you to go to BlizzCon.
Yeah.
And now you're fucking, fuck you. Yeah, you're not doing exactly what we want when we want. It's like, grow up.
It's so
grow
gross.
Up. Just grow up.
So gross.
That's right, a game that nearly everyone knew was predatory, a game that would receive bans in multiple countries because of its pay-to-win in-game gambling structure that targeted children, a game designed as a cash grab for the phone. Pat and Ian chose to side with that. It didn't end there though. It was such a disgusting position, a position not indifferent from someone defending the Amico while staring the evidence in the face. In a now private video, Pat and Ian made Pew News. There wasn't much said because the stupidity of their position spoke for herself.
You of course have people with the best take on this ever.
However, Pat channeled his inner Tommy Tallarico and doubled down with a passive-aggressive Christmas NES Punk video in January of 2019, followed by a podcast topic revisiting their position in February of 2021.
Do you regret any of the Diablo Immortal stuff?
No.
No. It's silly. We became the face of Blizzard Interaction. Little podcast.
Yeah, people took that as being pro-corporation.
Yeah, we're pro-corporation.
I even said in that segment that the game looked like it probably wasn't going to be very good. Like, I was not pro-corporation. I'm just tired of people complaining all the time.
Clearly, these two are not pro-big corporation, and I am so proud of how they continue to let their actions speak louder than their words.
Time for some sponsor ad reads. Loot Crate.
I might just use something we got in the mail for a future promotion to just zip it all off.
I don't think that's the proper use of it, Ian. We don't want to get off on the wrong foot with our potential new sponsor here. Manscaped, the best in men's below and above the belt grooming. I stopped eating cereal for years until Magic Spoon, the nutritious and delicious breakfast cereal.
3 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 5 out of 10, 3 out of 10.
I had a sponsored stream by Raid Shadow Legends.
Wow!
Speaking of, D&D influence there, and elves and orcs and knights and stuff, and it was fun.
Fresh ingredients to prepare your own meals every week. It's called Blue Apron. If you want a good, clean shave at an affordable price, go to dollarshaveclub.com.
Pat has positioned himself as the moral authority on public figures who are bad actors. If you have a large following, produce content on YouTube that crosses into video games, and you've done something objectionable, he's likely taken you to task in a very public forum. The number of people he's been friendly with, produced content alongside, and then turned on in very vicious ways is too numerous to list here. It's almost as if Pat has a strong sense of what he views as being wrong, and sees life as black and white without any shades of gray. Pat certainly has a moral code, but it appears that it's not quite as it would seem. Upon closer examination, it's hard to tell exactly where he stands due to a high amount of contradictions, double standards, and self-serving actions connected to each of these attacks. As recent as 2022, Pat and Ian made clear their position on how the company you keep reflects the person you are.
I feel good over the past years in calling out bad actors and behaviors, even other influencers, calling out all the shit that PewDiePie used to do and things like that. You want to make sure that the people that follow you kind of reflect your own beliefs and your own morality as much as you can.
Pat's been known for nearly a decade to toss everyone not useful to him under the bus, including friends and family, even going so far as to embed his grievances with some through multiple podcast segments running multiple years, making them a mainstay of the show. It would seem this moral code trumps and transcends friendships when required. So with that in mind, maybe it's shocking to learn Pat has maintained close connections, including collaborating with someone who's been in hot water numerous times, someone who created a disgusting and racist comic strip that used the worst tropes, words, and humiliation in its depictions, someone who's never really taken responsibility for their actions while being protected by his friends. This, of course, is Mike Matei. The situation has been known about for close to a decade in smaller circles, as he wasn't exactly hiding it. There was a dedicated website for his comic, and his name was proudly displayed on every single issue he created. The racist character even appeared in AVGN Episode 7 as an Easter egg, and crazy as it may seem, it still remains an active video on the channel to this day. However, prior to Mike's racist comic going viral for the wrong reasons in 2018, he was in hot water for morally questionable actions, such as uploading his exposed genitalia, showing them alongside a ruler to prove its length to non-age restricted communities, including his public Twitter account and the AVGN subreddit in 2015, or that time he created sexually explicit commentary over children's content, such as the Elmo movie for the AVGN channel, videos which were uploaded and then quickly deleted after people started calling it out. When the Mike Matei racist comic went viral in 2018, the move from everyone on Team Mike, including Pat, was to hide, ban, and ignore all comments related to it. And it made sense. This team had been in deep crap prior to this coming to light, and this was a tactic that had always worked. There was never any official, visible discussion or comment addressing any of this. Mike replied to some regarding it back in 2007, but it was on an underground website and in response to someone who enjoyed his work.
Hey, I draw the Loco Bandito when I feel like it, and I haven't really felt like it.
People can be naive and do dumb, shameful things. No one who attempts to change should be characterized as the person they no longer are. Not everyone has the same set of tools, influences, or environment needed to understand why something that's clearly wrong is indeed wrong. Yet even though Pat tossed Mike under the bus during the Cheetamen Scam, James has always been loyal. Pat's need for James, along with owing the start of his career to both James and Mike, appears to play into him never addressing this, while going after other creators and friends for near-identical actions. Pat has shown a clear inability to forgive people he feels have wronged him or crossed his questionable moral code. PewDiePie and Kevin are prime examples of people he just can't let go, and if it weren't for such blatant hypocrisy from both Ian and Pat on this matter, we wouldn't be discussing it here. But they set these standards, yet pick and choose who they are applied to. I can understand not wanting to speak out against someone you're close to if that's the moral position you take in matters such as these. However, we have 350 podcast episodes full of Pat's opinions, and we patently know he's a hypocrite who bases his attacks on what's most beneficial to his bottom line. So, what's next for Pat? Currently, he's working on a Nintendo 64 book, and being he stated the reviews were finished in 2021, I assume the launch date is right around the corner. Even after it comes out, the very existence of this book is quite troublesome due to Pat's general dislike for the platform and the problematic decision to use and defend the use of emulators to review every single game.
Oh, why are we using emulators? Because there's like 20 different writers, first of all. So then it comes down to, okay, you gotta get a flash cartridge to every writer. You gotta make sure they have the hardware. How do you capture it using a flash card? You have to have a computer and software to do that. Now, once you captured the video, you gotta go through that. Now you gotta pick out pictures in the video. So you're basically quadrupling the amount of work being done.
It's the N64. I need to... They're going for 90% compatibility.
Good fucking luck.
Good luck.
As I've talked about before, and people came after me, it's like, why did you do that? I just went through the hell for trying to get screenshots and accuracy for that looked like the 90s for 400 games. N64 emulation is the fucking pits. It's the pits.
Right.
And it's not going to get close to 100% anytime soon. On my computer, I couldn't even run Rogue Squadron at a stable frame rate. And my graphics card's not that old.
A game reviewer and their opinions are 100% dependent on the software being accurately represented. Knowing emulation is being used for the entire book means two things. One, an original controller was almost certainly not used. This is critical to the N64 platform, where the controller was a major part of the player experience. One that can't be dismissed in any sort of self-proclaimed ultimate guide. The second being, emulation just can't be trusted to give proper representation. And if the reviewer doesn't intimately know what a proper representation of the game they're reviewing is, then we can't trust a single review in this book. There's just zero way to know if the emulator used for any game in this book properly represents the visuals, frame rate, audio, and in-game controls of the actual game. It may be much worse, or even fix issues presented on real hardware. Remember, we're talking about a book that is marketed as a trustworthy source of critical reviews. If it was just a reflections or a guidebook, it wouldn't matter, and it wouldn't be a deal breaker. But this is. Do the community a favor and don't support this book. I think this is a good spot to make clear that I reached out and spoke to over 30 people, including those discussed in this video, and non-public figures to confirm details. If it couldn't be confirmed by at least 2 unconnected sources or physical evidence, I didn't discuss it. Some items I wanted to discuss, I was simply asked not to by those who shared personal details, documents, and their stories. The situation with Pat is disappointing because there's a need for a person like him, someone who speaks their mind, is unfiltered, and tackles tough topics. Someone like The Geek Getaway? Another small YouTuber who Pat depended on almost exclusively for content related to the Amico on his podcast. But up until Slopes released his Amico documentary, you've likely never heard of The Geek Getaway, or nearly anyone else the CU podcast used as a source without a large online presence when reporting info on the system. That's honestly not shocking either, as it's a useful tactic when someone wants to be the official source, wants to squash competition, and greatly dislikes giving credit to those they see as beneath them. Pat's not alone here. Bomber Guy, who released the now famous and fantastic Roadblocks Oof video, admitted to not discussing incriminating items regarding Tommy Tallarico that should have been covered because it would have forced him to also mention the source, that being The Geek Getaway. We need a community advocate to stand up against shameful corporations and individuals that only care about filling their bank accounts. Pat's not that guy though. Instead, he's legit the closest we have to Donald Trump having a love child with Tommy Tallarico. He's the expert who knows all things, is never wrong, and will never admit fault. I don't want to end the video with anyone having the impression that I'm personally offended by anything shared here. While I have massive issues with a few of these items discussed, the real point of this video was to showcase a decade-long pattern of hypocrisy via things Pat has said and done, and how every action he takes is done in the most self-serving way possible. Like Jimmy Savile, someone can visibly do good deeds while not being a good person. That's it for now, and until next time, thank you for watching Retro Impressions.